Hello, good morning. Today our guest is Professor Jay Zagorsky. Hello, Jay. What's up? How are you doing?
I'm doing pretty well. And
I'm
let me say,
awesome, Jay. Well, continue.
go ahead, go ahead.
Now we're just saying that I am awesome.
Uh, Let me say, Lipton, I enjoyed reading your article about Botswana. And in particular, I teach macroeconomics to MBAs at Boston University. And one of the examples I use is Botswana. And in particular, you asked in that question why Botswana is doing so much better than some of the other South African countries or Southern African countries. And there's a part of Botswana that's separated from a part of Namibia by a small river. It's in the Caprizi Strip. And the people, just for accident of European history, some of the people are in Namibia and some of the people are in Botswana. Getting across the river is pretty easy. A small boat takes you across in about 4 or 5 minutes. And the Botswana part, the people are upset when the internet goes down. And the part in Namibia, they're very lucky when they have running water. It's just amazing economic differences between a geographic area that is probably less than 2 football pitches apart.
Yes, quite the divergence. In one place, people have the internet, so they appreciate it more. And in the other country, they're more interested in the day-to-day utilities of life, like running water.
Mm. It's quite interesting. So, and I actually make some of the same arguments in class that you make in your article, that a lot has to do with sort of the political structure and has to do with sort of economic development. It's not about initial endowments.
I agree. Well, Jay, if you have been following my channel, I've been interviewing some pretty interesting economists. So maybe you can share this video and the other videos with your students.
Okay.
Yeah, because on my show, I pose rather difficult questions and my guests, they're usually in a position to answer. So we're going to hit the ground running. Jay, are poor people more likely to consume fast food? You have done many studies in this area.
So interesting question, Lipton. And part of some of my research has been looking at some questions and challenging some popular assumptions. And one of the popular assumptions is that poor people eat fast food, rich people don't. So there's really sort of a gradient if we're looking at wealth or income versus fast food consumption, where people who have relatively little wealth and income, high amounts of fast food, and people with relatively large amounts of wealth and income, low amounts of fast food. And what's interesting is I used a study called the National Longitudinal Survey of Youth, the NLS. And the NLS asks respondents questions about their fast food consumption. And the NLS takes people from all over the United States. It's a random sample. And the surveys that I use, the data sets I use, there were about 8,000 people in each survey that were answering. So it's a pretty large, it's not a 200 or 300 people responding. But instead, there's lots and lots of people. And they were asked, in the past 2 weeks, did you eat any fast food at places? And they give some examples like McDonald's or a Pizza Hut or Kentucky Fried Chicken and things like that. And what the actual graph looks like is it doesn't look like a downward sloping line. Instead, it looks like an inverted U-shaped curve. Poor people, actually the very poorest, actually eat less fast food than people who are sort of, I would say, lower middle class. It sort of goes up and then comes down again. But even among the very wealthiest people in the NLS study, many of them said that they ate fast food. And let me give you a quick example. We've had 2 US presidents that have loved fast food. Bill Clinton, well, he was actually famous for going out for a jog and stopping in at McDonald's and saying hello to people, eating some of their French fries, getting a little food. And that's on the Democratic side. On the Republican side, Donald Trump did a number of commercials for McDonald's, right? He was actually a pitch person for McDonald's doing ads. And when he was in the White House, he actually served fast food to a number of people when they came to visit. So we have both people on the relatively wealthy, both Bill Clinton and Donald Trump, relatively wealthy people, both loving fast food.
Poor people have less money, therefore fast food is expensive. Lower middle class people have a little more money, and as a result, they're likely to purchase more fast food. And why? It is a form of a status commodity if you're an average working class person. So for example, Kentucky in America may not be as wonderful. In Jamaica, Kentucky is awesome, and it's always packed. The lines are really, really long. And I was having a conversation with a friend once, and he said, in Jamaica, Kentucky is still a status good. When I was a little boy, it was, but I didn't know that people still place a high premium on Kentucky, and unfortunately, they do. So if you're a working class person, you have more money than someone who's poor. Therefore, you can afford to purchase fast food because fast food is your luxury as an average working class person. And rich people have a lot of money, so they can buy whatever they want.
All right, so I haven't been to Jamaica yet, Lipton. It's on my list as soon as COVID's over of places to go, but it seems pretty interesting. I'll have to stop in a Kentucky Fried Chicken as a status symbol. Make sure I have a selfie of me and Kentucky Fried Chicken.
But Jay, I've always wondered, why don't more economists like yourself study Jamaica? We don't know a lot. So for example, you could write on the intellectual culture during slavery, the plantation system, trust and economic growth. The data on Jamaica, my God, it's just rich.
I think part of the reason is ease of access. I have a good friend at the University of West Indies in the Mona campus, and he's always asking me, can you get me this article? Can you find some data for me?
Which department?
He's an economist.
Okay, all right.
But I think economists in general, there's so many interesting things to look at that we like going for the low-hanging fruit right now. You know, if the data is on the internet, oh, I'll investigate that topic. If the data is not there, if I actually have to, you know, sit there and go through the archives, if I actually have to hire research assistants to transcribe numbers for me, or sit there, I think it's just that when it becomes a little bit more difficult, there's so many easy questions to answer that people will switch away. So maybe that's one of the reasons why. I don't know.
Yeah, so for example, one writer, Aaron Graham, is a historian. He wrote a study on patenting in Jamaica during the early years, and they were surprised because when you compared Jamaica at that time to wealthy countries, it was doing quite well. Yeah, so that's an era of research, and there's also the problem of trust and economic growth. Countries that are deficient in trust tend to be poor, and Jamaica is a low trust country.
Yes, yes, on the trust index, Jamaica is a low trust country. I think for me, as a person who studies in Boston, which is part of the United States, the question is the United States moving a little bit more towards a low trust country?
Yes, I think so.
Interesting question. And what can we do to improve it? Anyways, let's go back to fast food for a minute.
Yeah, fast food.
Yeah, go back to our status symbol of getting a hamburger. Here in the United States, fast food isn't a status symbol, but instead it's, as its title say, it's fast. And when I did the research, what was really interesting is that people who work a lot of hours or people whose jobs had them commuting, for example, truck drivers and things like that, tended to eat a lot of fast food. And I think part of it is here is it's just so convenient. You're hungry, you know, you don't really have a lot of time. You pull off the highway, you pull off the road, you go through a drive-through window, you pick up something to eat really quick, and then you keep driving and you're nibbling as you're driving down the road. I will admit, I do that quite frequently. I can't tell you how many meals each week, especially before COVID, that I would eat while driving in the car.
Well, for me, I like jerk chicken, and in Jamaica, there's a restaurant called Island Grill, and I buy its jerk chicken, and it's good. But I'm not a big fan of fast food anymore. I prefer fine dining. But Jay, what about pop soda?
So I've done a research into a whole bunch of things, such as looking at fast food and pop soda, primarily because here in the United States, we have an obesity epidemic. And part of the obesity epidemic, I believe, is economic, right? And trying to understand the economics behind obesity might be one way of curbing the obesity epidemic. And the obesity epidemic is kind of important because there seems to be direct relationship between people who are obese and, say, lower life expectancy. And the goal of pretty much any society is making sure its members live as long as possible. So looking at fast food was one way. Also looking at soda consumption was another. Soda consumption was a little bit different. It wasn't so much of a U-shaped gradient, but it was actually much more what we expected, that poorer people ate or drank much higher levels. And as you got richer and richer, people actually consumed far less soda. So that was actually kind of interesting. Though there is a definite correlation between fast food and soda. The more people who ate fast food, the more they drank soda. And my guess, because a lot of people have asked me about this, my guess is because fast food restaurants sell these combination packages. Instead of saying, oh, I'll have this sandwich and I'll have this, they just say, oh, I'll take a number 2. And a number 2 includes, say, French fries and a drink. But pretty much whatever the package is, it always includes a drink which has soda in it. So people who eat more fast food tend to drink a fair amount more soda.
Soda complements fast food. This is often served with soda. And in relation to your point, maybe wealthier people are unlikely to consume soda because they're more educated. That could be a possible explanation.
Could be. As I told you before, I oftentimes pop into fast food and then drive while eating. But because I've done this research, I have a couple of bottles of water sort of always stashed in the car, in the cup holders and things like that. So I try and make sure I never order one of these combo meals. I always just order the sandwich itself or just the fries. And I make sure I try and drink the water. I don't know if it's I'm representative or doing research actually changes your habits. Once you do the research, you're like, maybe I shouldn't be drinking so much soda.
Jay, I have an assignment for you. Maybe you should study the extent to which health is a status symbol for highly educated people. For example, the gym craze or dieting.
It could be. Could be.
Yes. College students, bankers, professionals, they love dieting and they love the gym. Ordinary people tend to invest in traditionally home-based medicines, but they're not big on dieting or going to the gym.
Something to think about. Yeah, the problem with this interview, Lipton, is I'm going to have more things to do as soon as the interview's over.
That's the point of the interview. I like to challenge bright people like yourself.
Well, thank you for the compliment.
Yeah, so for example, the gym. Do you go to the gym, Jay?
Lipton, I'm actually a bicyclist, and I bicycle outside on the roads pretty much 6 days a week, no matter what the weather is.
All right, so you're not interested in signaling status by going to the gym?
I'll be honest with you. I've tried the gym, and I've tried, for example, the bicycles in the gym. The problem is that there's so much beauty outside in the real world. I mean, feeling the rain on your face or listening to the birds is just so much different than sitting there in a gym crowded with a whole bunch of people all pedaling really fast to some very loud music. There's a sort of a music to the world, which is why it's nice to get outside.
Yeah, going to the gym is a package. It's a part of a broader package called entertainment. Yeah, that's one of the reasons why I'm not so big on going to the gym. But back to one of your more interesting studies. Jay, blondes. Are blondes really dumb?
I'll answer the question in a second, but let me tell you that for many years, I was sort of junior faculty. And now that I'm senior faculty, I always wanted to publish that paper. When I first started looking at the data for the National Longitudinal Survey, which is the study I did for fast food and soda drinking, the National Longitudinal Survey did IQ tests of pretty much every single respondent. And because the National Longitudinal Survey is longitudinal, it goes back to the same people time after time, it was very important for the surveyors to know that they were interviewing the right person, especially when a person was being offered an honorarium. So Lipton, let me say that I'm offering you, say, a $50 or $75 honorarium, and you don't have much money. Well, if you have a close brother or sister, and they realize you're getting $50 or $75 for it, and I, the interviewer, show up at the house and ring the doorbell, you might be like, oh, I could use $75. Let me answer the questions instead. So the NLS actually asked questions about hair color, height, and weight to give the interviewers an idea that they were interviewing the right person, not a brother or a cousin or somebody there in the survey. So the NLS actually has very, very good data on intelligence, And it also has interesting data on sort of personal characteristics like blondes. And when I first got involved, I was like, oh, I've seen so many jokes about dumb blondes. I wonder if it's true. But as a junior faculty member, I would never want to publish that paper, because once you start publishing those papers, people could say, oh, you know, you're not a serious academic. We're not going to promote you to do anything. So it took me many years before I was willing to publish the paper. But once I felt pretty secure in my status, so we're going back to your status ideas. Once I felt secure in my status, I was like, oh, I could do that paper. It was a very simple paper, just looking at the relationship between intelligence, IQ, and hair color. And what's kind of interesting is that blonde women did not end up at the very bottom. Instead, blonde women actually had the highest intelligence. Now, before you say anything, okay, Lipton, what was interesting is there were more blonde females in my sample than I was expecting. There were a lot more females who were blonde than there were men who were blonde. So we're expecting genetically to be roughly the same number of blonde men as blonde women, brunette men, brunette women, red-haired men and women, and so on. But there were a whole bunch more. So one of the questions that I can't answer is, are these women who are smart dyeing their hair blonde? Or is it blonde who are people who are born blonde? And that's one of these interesting questions. I don't know. Is it another form of status symbol? Oh, I want to have a high status, so I'm going to dye my hair blonde.
Well, Jay, I read a study several years ago saying that brunettes over the course of their professional careers earn more than, no, sorry, blondes earn more than brunettes. So when young women start out to work as professionals, brunettes are seen as smarter, but over the course of the career, blondes tend to improve and they begin to earn more.
I guess what you're telling me, Lipton, from that study is I should go to the hairdresser as soon as I hang up from this interview and get my hair dyed blonde.
Yeah, well, basically the study is saying that blondes are not really dumb, but people discriminate negatively against blondes. And as a result, it is indicated by lower salaries. But over time, entrepreneurs gain insight and they recognize that blondes are just as smart as other people. Yeah, so I'm not surprised by your finding. At no point did I consider blondes to be dumb. That is just a stereotype.
I will
Look,
say most stereotypes turn out not to be correct.
yeah, and exactly, and this is why we need to define stereotypes. So, for example, accurate beliefs about people are not stereotypes. Therefore, if I'm watching a movie and someone from Australia is eating an old woman, and I assume that Australians eat people, that is a stereotype. But if I meet 20 people who can attest to Australians eating people, and if I read books detailing Australians and their exploits in eating people, then it is no longer a stereotype.
Okay, I never heard of that stereotype of Australians.
No, it isn't. It's just an example.
I see.
It's just a random example, but accurate beliefs about people and groups are not stereotypes. If it is verified, then you shouldn't call it a stereotype. But blondes are dumb, that's a stereotype and a silly one. It is just comedic.
I will tell you, after I published that study, a lot of interest from particular Russia. The TV camera crew showed up here in the house in this office. I was like, yes, you're coming in. You know, a Moscow TV crew came in to interview. They seemed very, very happy that I published the findings that blonde women were not dumb.
I like Russian academics. They're eccentric. They're not afraid to study weird topics. And I'm a bit eccentric myself. But we're going to move on to another study that he did, and I think that this study has implications for a wider debate. Do people spend their inheritance or do they save it?
So this is kind of interesting. And I think that paper that I did, also using the National Longitudinal Survey, I've done a fair number of papers using the NLS, the National Longitudinal Survey, that I found that a lot of people basically spend their inheritance. In the National Longitudinal Survey, there's a wealth section of questions for every interview. And let me just tell you a little background about the NLS. The NLS interviewed people when they were young. It started off when they were teenagers and started interviewing them every single year. And then as they got older and less things happen in their life, it switched every 2 years, and now it's roughly every 3 years that people are interviewed. And in pretty much every interview, we ask people their income using a variety of questions, such as how much did you earn in wages, salaries, how much did you earn in interest, all these other things. And then many of the surveys, not all, but many questions were asked about wealth. Do you own a house? Do you own a car? Do you own any stocks? Do you own any bonds? Do you have any retirement accounts? These kind of things. And that way you can come up with people's net worth. And also the question was, did you get any inheritances or large gifts between the last survey and this current survey? So we can sort of track people who said, oh, you know, somebody died and they left me $100,000, or they left me $200,000, or maybe even only $10,000. You know, small, medium, and large amounts were all tracked by the inheritances. Because of this, I can see when inheritances came to a person. They're like, oh, I inherited money 5 years ago. I know their net worth. Net worth is their assets minus their liabilities. I know their net worth before the inheritance, and then we know their net worth after the inheritance. And you can see, did people actually spend their inheritance or not? And what was really surprising to me is that people spent quite a bit of their inheritance. For those who received an exceptionally large inheritance, they saved some of it. But the average person spent quite a bit of it. Give me 1 second and I'll pull up the exact number, unless you happen to remember it from the abstract of the article. So what we found is more than 1/3 of all the people who got inheritances saw a decline in their wealth after the inheritances. And even people who received very large amounts, where I define very large amounts as more than $100,000 US, about 1/5, 1 out of every 5 people who received an inheritance of more than $100,000 ended up with less net worth. Wow. Can you imagine getting, say, $100,000 or $150,000, $200,000 and then spending it all in just a few years?
No, I cannot imagine that scenario, Jay, because I'm smart. I would buy stocks or start a business.
Yeah.
So I can't imagine that scenario. But your findings are unsurprising. Based on what we do know, inherited wealth grows slowly. People who make their money in the market tend to be richer on average.
I also think another reason, and this, you know, we didn't ask why people spent their inheritances, but I think part of it is that if I go out and earn money, you know, let's assume that I have to give a class or a lecture and I earn that money, I feel like, you know, wow, I worked hard for that money. I'm not going to just spend it wildly. But if someone gives me, say, a lottery ticket, and the lottery ticket turns out to be worth a lot of money, I'm like, this is found money. I'm just going to go spend it. You know, I didn't earn it. I didn't have to work really hard for it. It's just free money. So free money, I can go off and spend. Let me go off and buy the clothes I want. Let me buy the car I want. Let me just go off and do something with it.
Yes, the reality is that life actually begins at 40. So someone said to me, no, let me explain. A professional, she said to me, from 25 to 35, you should be working and earning money so that you can retire. But the truth is that, Jay, the average person really grows a mature brain by 40. At 40, he's in a position where he has recognized that, oh, I'm not that successful.
So what you're telling me is it's not just measuring someone's IQ, but what we should really be measuring is not only IQ, but also emotional intelligence.
Well, emotional intelligence is a consequence of IQ. Let me give a perfect example. I am John Brown. I'm walking on the road. Someone stepped on my shoe, and it's a new shoe that's quite expensive. If I'm intelligent, I may just smile, laugh it off, and move on. I may even engage the person who irritated me in a conversation, who knows, he could be the next Bill Gates. Intelligent people have a longer view of life and the world in general, so they're more inclined to temper a situation when it becomes too hostile. So emotional intelligence is a consequence of IQ.
During the pandemic, I've spent a lot of time here in this room, so I don't have to worry too much about someone coming in and stepping on my shoes. But I will, next time someone does step on my shoes, I'll try and say, be calm, take a longer view of life.
Yeah, yes, it could be the next Bill Gates. So for example, I'm a random person. I contribute to various publications, but I'm not famous. I sent you an email and you said yes. You could have said no. Some people, because I don't have 1 million subscribers, they're going to say no. But Jay, you're the smart one. You're smart because you know that within the next 3 to 5 years, I will be the talk of the town. So you are launching, well, you don't need to launch yourself, you're already prominent, but you understand the value of appearing on a show like this.
Actually, Lipton, so you sent me an email out of the blue and you introduced yourself. Doctors, medical doctors, they take an oath to heal pretty much anyone who's sick who comes there. But when I became an academic, I took a personal oath. I don't think any other academic has this oath, but my goal as an academic is to spread knowledge, or at least correct knowledge, not perpetuate stereotypes. So my goal is whenever somebody in the media calls up, sends an email, my answer is, as long as I have free time, I talk to them. I talk to from, students who are, this is my first interview, to people who, are super professionals and have millions of subscribers and are on famous news shows. So my goal is, it doesn't matter who you are, because maybe I can help 1 or 2 people, or maybe I can help thousands sort of understand a little bit more about how the world works.
Well, Jay, maybe all academics actually took that out. As you said before, you're interested in knowledge, but I'm just a random writer. Some people like my writing. But after starting the show, I was actually surprised at the response. Within a few months and weeks, I was getting basically most of the big names on the right, left, and everywhere. Even Robin Dunbar was on the show. So maybe all academics have that mindset. Yeah, I'm still a bit flabbergasted. People keep wondering and asking, how did you get those guys? And I'm like, I don't know. I guess they're just like people who are interested in their research. But I think that could be an interesting case study. Can a random person just get a top-notch academic or writer just like that?
I'll be honest, I don't look up people. If they say they want to talk to me, I'm like, sure, as long as I can fit you into my schedule.
Yeah, I guess most people have that mindset. As one of my colleagues said, never be afraid to reach out to someone. We may assume that, oh, I'm not famous, so he's going to ignore me. But again, successful people have a longer view of life. So more than likely, they will say yes.
Yeah. One of the things that I like about talking to, I won't call it random, but people who've actually read some of my work, is that sometimes you get new insight. I've actually been talking to people, and at the end of the interview, I went, I never thought of that. Wow, that's some implications.
Yes. And Jay, so for example, I think it's pretentious to interview someone without reading the actual study or doing a lot of research. But when I was looking on some of your studies, I saw a piece on asthma. And I've never really analyzed asthma from that perspective. Tell us a little about that study, the relationship between asthma and wealth.
Let me be honest with you, Lipton. I write a lot of studies. I remember doing the asthma one, but off the top of my head, I don't remember the results. I can look it up.
Yeah, you don't need to look it up. I have it right in front of me. It's titled, Does Asthma Impair Wealth Accumulation, or Does Wealth Protect Against Asthma? Asthma and Wealth Accumulation.
And let me ask you, I believe my findings were that asthma did not prevent wealth accumulation. Was that true?
Yeah, wealth ranking does not change after a diagnosis of asthma, but inheriting a substantial sum is associated with a lower risk of severe asthma.
Mhm.
Conclusion, wealth appears to protect against severe asthma, supporting the social causation model of disease.
Yeah. And now that you're mentioning it, once again, these are questions because asthma affects a large number of people, especially some people in poor communities who are located next to industries that are polluting and things like that. And what I remember is that people who got some inheritances, people who got some gifts, they were able to buy things like inhalers. They're able to buy medicine. They're able to go see doctors. But in general, asthma is not going to hold you back, is what I remember from that study. And this is what I sort of like about economics, is that you can investigate all kind of interesting things, like the relationship between asthma and economic outcomes.
Jay, so I like to interview people who are willing to engage in a new frontier. Healthy people on average, sorry, wealthier people and educated people on average, they live longer, okay?
They
But
do.
what is the channel through which these advantages are being transmitted? Is it genetics? Is it cultural? Is it cognitive ability?
So let me use my hands for a moment. I love talking with my hands, especially in a lecture. The question is it wealth that causes health, or is it health which causes wealth? Let's take the bottom one first, only because that's the way my fingers are going. So I'm healthy, and because I'm healthy, I'm able to work, say, 365 days a year. We'll ignore vacations and things like that. And because I'm healthy and I'm able to work all the time, I have higher income and build up more wealth. That's one possibility. The other possibility is this one, is that wealth and income causes health. I'm wealthy, I have high income, and then I'm able to actually go to the doctor. Because I'm wealthy, I'm able to buy fresh fruits and vegetables. I'm able to buy better food. I'm able maybe to get more exercise. So health is caused by this higher income. So which channel is it? The upper one, wealth causes health, or is the bottom one, health causes wealth? I think as in economics, it's never an either or story. It's neither this channel or this channel. It's both channels at the same time. And the question is, which one has a bigger impact, right? Is it, I'm wealthy, I'm able to afford doctors and good food and exercise, or live in a neighborhood where I don't have as much pollution? Or is it the bottom one, I'm born with good genes, I'm a healthy person, and that causes me to have good wealth, all right? The Olympics, for those of you watching this tape years or months from now, the 2020 Olympics, which were actually held in August 2021, just finished. And Lipton, since you're Jamaican, I'd like to say
Yes.
congratulations. There were many Jamaican sprinters who did amazing. Lots of gold for the Jamaican sprinters team. Yes?
Yes.
Yes. So that was people with good genes. And because they won gold, they are now internationally famous, and they had good health, which causes an increase of their income and wealth. So they're sort of great examples of that bottom one. Good health causes much higher income and living standards for these people. Go ahead.
Understanding why Jamaicans do so well in athletics is not difficult. First point, Jamaica was once under British rule, and the British perceived athletics as an avenue to turn boys into gentlemen. So in Jamaica, there is an association. Grace Kennedy sponsors Champs. That's what we call it in Jamaica. And Champs is an event for young athletes. It's quite competitive. Jamaicans love sports, so they support Champs. The private sector and the government over the years have invested in sports. So historically, Jamaicans do well in sports because of its institutions. And secondly, Orlando Patterson, in his recent book, Jamaica, the Confounding Island, he argues that Jamaica grew old before it became rich. When Jamaica was a colony, the country benefited from a program to improve health outcomes, and it was quite successful. So because Jamaicans are relatively healthy, they can run. That's the essence of his argument. And he cited the study of a well-known demographer.
Actually, my friend who works at the University of West Indies, sent me an article by Malcolm Gladwell. And he asked why in this article were Jamaican runners doing so well. And he said he thought it was a very simple reason that people who run in Jamaica are rewarded with both status and money.
Institutions, exactly. Yeah. Champs.
Yeah. And he actually said he had a cousin in Jamaica, and the cousin's son was running, and the cousin's son was in grade school, and they had a sprint coach in grade school. And I talked to my wife. I said, wow, a sprint coach in grade school. Our local elementary school is a few blocks away, and we don't have a sprint coach. So I don't expect any, Olympic sprinters to come out of my school district.
Yes, the champs is responsible for training future Olympians. Jamaicans love champs. People who live abroad return to Jamaica just to watch champs. Therefore, if you invest in the right institutions, then any country can produce athletes. And as I said earlier, Jamaica grew old before it became rich. But I'm interested in the genetic argument. So at some point, I may interview an evolutionary anthropologist to discuss the issue.
A little bit outside of my field, evolutionary
yeah, biology. I've read many studies, and I've interacted with some of these people via email and on this show. But people are impressed by the athletic prowess of Jamaica. However, it is a matter of priorities. Jamaicans like entertainment. There is a billboard in Jamaica, Jamaica made for fun. And a professor was interviewed by a Canadian publication, and he said that Kamala Harris, her father, Donald Harris, is a down-to-earth person. Jamaica has an informal culture. But the downside is that when you emphasize entertainment over business and science, you can become less productive. America has many private and public research foundations to finance science, entrepreneurship, and the humanities. Jamaica has an organization called the Chase Fund, and the Chase Fund invests more in sports than healthcare and education. So you see the downside.
Yeah, priorities. Unfortunately, we can't have everything in life.
Yes, I'm not a sport. Do you like sports?
I bicycle 6 days a week.
Yeah, I like to walk. I'm not a sports person, but as a poor country, science and education should take primacy over sports. I do not have a problem with Jamaica doing well in athletics, but I would prefer for Jamaicans to do well in science and industry. That makes perfect sense. So Orlando Patterson, when he was in Jamaica, he gave a speech and he said, the founding father of Jamaica, well, one of the founding fathers of Jamaica was a Rhodes Scholar and an athlete. And he was elucidating the point that historically politicians and founding fathers are usually military men or intellectual men. They're not necessarily athletic.
I would agree.
Yeah, so, and I like interviews, I like long walks. My activities are a bit off-putting to some people, but I'm just not a sports person. And I think that for long-term development, sport should get less emphasis. That's just common sense and economic history and quantitative analysis.
But I will say that sport definitely gives a short-term boost, both to ego and to a sort of feeling of self-esteem.
Yes, it does. So Jamaicans like to say, oh, we punch above our weight, and I remind them, Usain Bolt is a talented athlete, but that is an individual achievement. When Usain Bolt earns money, either by running or through endorsements, he's benefiting. A scientist may create a magnificent product and only get like 2.2% of the surplus value of his invention. This is what research shows. Innovators only get a small share of your invention. So from a long-term perspective, it's better to invest in an exceptionally brilliant student than a sportsman. But two different, I am one person living in a different culture. But if Jamaicans like sports, not a problem. But we have to get back to your research. Earlier in our conversation, you mentioned IQ. And I have interviewed many leading researchers in IQ, people who are at the top of their field from the USA and Germany. IQ predicts well-being and wealth, happiness, many factors. And you did a study saying that intelligent people usually are richer. Do you remember that study?
I do remember that study. I don't remember that being my conclusion. What I basically remember is that there was not not a relationship between IQ and wealth. And let me give you a quick story instead of shouting off statistics. Some of the smartest people in the world tend to be at universities. Universities tend to be, they seem to collect people with high IQs, right? Because I guess getting PhDs.
Hold on, Jay, before you continue, yeah, I do remember your study. You said that each point increase in IQ test raises income by $234 and $616 per year after holding a variety of factors constant. Yes, but you can continue.
So what that study showed is that there was a relationship, a positive relationship between IQ and income, between, we'll call it IQ and your pay, right? That smarter people get paid more. But the interesting part about that is there's two ways of becoming rich. One is income, your pay, and the other way is your wealth. Your wealth is your assets minus your liabilities, your net worth. Assets would be things like homes, stocks, bonds, and liabilities would be things like mortgages, student debt, credit card, outstanding bills, and things like that. And there was not a relationship between IQ and wealth. All right. While there is a positive relationship between IQ and income, smarter people get paid more. Smarter people don't necessarily have more wealth than people who aren't as smart. And I think that was pretty interesting because there's two ways of being rich. One way is having a high income, and the other way is having a high net worth. And I'll give you a couple of examples. New doctors, let's say your first year as a surgeon, really high income, but your net worth, at least here in the United States, is very low, maybe even negative, because to become a new doctor, many of those people took out loans for years of medical school, and then here in the United States before that for undergraduate. So doctors, high income, but very low net worth, at least in the beginning. Or retirees, people who go off to the Caribbean to retire after they're done working, or maybe to Florida or Arizona, California. These are people relatively low income, really high net worth, because many of them are selling off their assets in order to fund their retirement. So there's a difference between people's income and their net worth, and IQ didn't really seem to have much relationship. And the example I was about to tell you a couple of minutes ago would be universities. Universities, a place with people with really high IQ, but when I walk around the various universities in the world, I just don't see a parking lot full of Rolls Royces or Mercedes cars or things like that. I see a lot of sort of middle of the road, beaten up cars where professors are driving them for a long time. So some really smart people, but they don't have at least some of the outward showing assets, those status assets, fancy cars.
Well, I looked at your study, and but based on what I've read, other studies show a strong relationship between IQ and wealth, but this relationship is strongest for the smart fraction. In other words, people with the IQ of a Bill Gates or an Elon Musk.
Elon Musk could be a really interesting case here because Elon Musk's salary from Tesla, zero.
We know the story of Tesla. We know the story of Tesla. For a long time, it didn't even accumulate profit. But continue.
Yeah, but Elon Musk has a large number of shares of Tesla. So his net worth, relatively high. His income, no. So once again, there's not necessarily a relationship between income and wealth or income and net worth. The Wall Street Journal about 9 months ago or a year ago actually ran a story that Elon Musk was selling some houses because it appeared he actually needed some cash. Some income and didn't want to sell his Tesla shares. So this another one of these ideas where people sort of get in their head that, oh, just because, we'll go back to Usain Bolt, just because he has high income necessarily means he's really wealthy. Usain Bolt could have, both high income and high wealth.
Yeah, more than likely he has liquid cash and physical property, because remember, endorsements represent pay, and he has a restaurant, so Bolt has real money.
But for many athletes, what happens is after they retire, all right, their income basically dries up and they have to live off their wealth. So there's not always this sort of tie between that income and wealth.
So Jay, maybe I'm going to pose another question. Well, not a question, an assignment. You should study the nexus between socio-cognitive traits and income. So for example, genius as a certain personality. His IQ may be 130, but when compared to someone with an IQ of 140, he's more eccentric. Eccentricity can be correlated with risk and greater innovation. Secondly, someone who is more open to ideas and new experiences may earn more than an introverted person. So that's the next big area of research, the relationship between cognitive traits and income. So this morning, I actually read a piece in the Foreign Policy magazine, and the professor was commenting on a girl. She's on TikTok and she has about 80 million followers. Now, this young lady is interviewing famous people. She's making money. And because she praised herself, well, not her followers, but critics got angry because they were saying, I went to school to study journalism, but I don't have a job. And I went and I attended a fairly prestigious school, yet I'm unemployed. And this girl who did not subject herself to the same level of training is doing better on a financial level. Why is she doing better is quite obvious. IQ is important, but up to a certain point. People need initiative. So someone with an IQ of 125 who is going to start a business, yes, the business may fail or it may succeed, but when one is able to exert initiative, more than likely you will attain greater levels of success than the person who did not engage in these risky activities. So for example, I can always say, I am not going to write a book. Okay, then I don't write the book. Someone else with less intelligence writes a book and he gets money. Should I then get upset because he's successful? No, I should blame myself for being a loser.
So there was actually a very popular book a number of years ago about grit.
Yes,
Grit. Yeah. Yes. Maybe someday you'll interview her.
Maybe.
And what was interesting is I looked at, we actually have grit scores and wealth. And there was a definite positive relationship between being wealthy and having a high grit score. So having sort of a gritty personality, I'm going to persevere no matter what, actually was a pretty good indicator for people having wealth later on in life.
So for example, Jay, grit, not your fee, but grit is also heritable. Personality like IQ can be inherited. I don't have a problem studying IQ. IQ is fascinating, but the new frontier is personality differences. Differences in openness, in individualism, in collectivism. That's the new frontier. So more assignments for you because they're so smart.
Well, I doubt I'm smart. I just, maybe I have a little bit extra grit. I do want to answer some of the questions that you just raised.
Yeah, and that's what you're going to do. But Jay, I promised you, you said that you wanted to talk about the war on cash. What's your objection to the war on cash?
All right, so we're going to have to make the war on cash. So I spend a fair amount of my time thinking about people's wealth, their personal side, but I also think about things that are sort of tangential to personal wealth, in particular, how people spend their money and the types of forms. And one of the things that I've been working on lately is this idea that there's sort of been a war on cash. Let me just give you a key statistic. Back here in the United States in the 1950s, 60s, and 70s, if I asked you, I said, Lipton, in the past month, did you use cash at all for any of your transactions? I would say 100% of the people in the United States would have said, yes, I used cash at some point in the last month, say 50 to 60 years ago. The most recent numbers found by the survey run by the Federal Reserve, which is the central bank of the United States. The most recent survey came out and was talking about 2020, last year. 75% of the people said, yes, I use cash. 25% of people said in the last month, I didn't use cash at all. That doesn't mean they didn't purchase things. They use credit cards, they use debit cards, they use prepaid cards, they use all kinds of, maybe they use their phone, but they didn't use cash itself. And I find this quite problematic for a couple of reasons. Number one of the reasons I find it problematic is that it's very expensive to actually have a bank account. When I look here in the greater Boston area, some of the cheapest bank accounts are between $12 and $20 a month. That's sort of the minimum charge. If you're working at minimum wages after taxes, you could be working 1 to 2 hours a month just to pay for your ability to have your money in a bank, which seems kind of silly, right? I mean, that's a fairly significant haircut for a person who doesn't have much income. And especially if you're putting money in and out of the bank, you have to worry about overdraft fees and things like that. That could raise things up, the amount of money you're spending and giving to a bank, to quite a large percent, which is why somewhere in the United States, somewhere between 7 and 8% of all people don't have bank accounts. So they use other things like check cashing services. They use Western Union. And these places are all very expensive. So credit cards, they're very nice if you tend to be wealthy and you tend to have some self-control. Debit cards, the same thing. But for poor people, this trend away from using cash, where some stores are like, oh no, we only accept electronic payments, is very troubling to me. The second
Yes.
thing I want to talk about is in particular for Jamaica. All right. Jamaica, the rest of the Caribbean, is being hit by a number of hurricanes, a number of severe storms. And when severe storms happen, power goes out, sometimes for a few minutes, sometimes for days. In particular, I'm going to talk about Hurricane Maria, which hit Puerto Rico. The power was out for almost 5 months in certain parts of the island. Yes, the capital regained power very quickly. But for less sort of further away from the capital parts of the island, no electricity for 5 months. And that causes people to have severe problems if they don't use cash. Here in the United States, we're experiencing right now some tremendous wildfires all over the west part of the United States, the West Coast. Imagine there's a fire coming right now towards you and I, Lipton. We have to get in our car and get away. But we notice there's only a quarter of a tank of gas, and that's not going to get us out of the fire zone. And we pull up to a gas station, and the gas station is like, I'm sorry, the power is out, because they're cutting the power, so there's fewer problems with the wildfires. We don't have cash, we can't escape. So as more and more natural disasters show up, it just seems to me that this trend in the world of going to a cashless society is one that has national security and personal security ramifications that it's very troubling as people go all electronic.
I agree with you to an extent, but I usually have cash, though I prefer to have a card. Sometimes having cash can make you susceptible to robberies. And this is one of the reasons why I like to use cards. But back to your example. Point number one, if we were in a situation and fire was on the horizon, maybe it would be you alone. I have the potential to smell trouble from afar. Yes, Jay, I can smell trouble from afar.
Send me an email when trouble's coming my way, please.
Yeah, like no, it's all about your view of time. So in conversations with people I know personally, I often say to them, am I smart? I don't think I'm that brighter than other people. I just have initiative and a better view of time. That's my edge. I can see trouble and success from afar. So it may take the average person 10 years to make a prediction. I can make it in a few months. No relationship between my ability to predict and IQ.
Okay.
Interestingly, smart people are skeptical of predictions. But Jay, we have been having an excellent conversation, but these days I'm doing shorter videos. So unfortunately, I have to end the conversation.
Lipton, it's been a pleasure talking to you. And allow me to just finish up with one short thought. And that short thought is, I am not against using credit cards. I use credit cards quite frequently. I'm just saying to your listeners, use cash occasionally. As long as cash still has existence in the system, we'll be doing okay. We just don't want to go all the way towards all electronic payments all the time.
Well, Jay, my listeners are quite brilliant. So they wouldn't assume that you are against credit cards. They're smart people. But one last question before I go. How would you rate this interview on a scale of 1 to 10, with 10 being the highest, 1 being the lowest?
Well, what you're asking is a sort of a net promoter score. And net promoter scores, 9s and 10s, are people who are positive and would tell others about it. So I'll give you a 10 out of 10, Lipton.
Thanks. Yeah, like Jay, I am the best secret around. I'm not bragging, but it's just the truth. No one else is doing what I'm doing. It's just the truth. But bye. All right then.
Lovely talking to you.
Yes.
Bye-bye.
Bye.